Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving deep into a pile of, well, pretty dense government permits. Why? Because we want to figure out what it actually takes to keep our local waterways from, just filling up with gunk.
So, how exactly do you dig up a waterway? Sounds simple, right? Well, today we're looking at the official plans for a huge dredging project right in Margate, New Jersey. We're going to see how a town literally has to scoop out its canals to stop them from turning into mudflats.
All right, first things first, let's set the scene here. Why does a place like Margate even need to do something this big? The problem itself is actually pretty simple. Waterways, we're talking about places like the Orient Canal, the Sunset Canal, the beach thoroughfare, they just don't stay deep by themselves. Over time, all this silt and sand and, well, sediment, it just washes in and builds up. Pretty soon, it gets way too shallow for boats to get through safely. So what's the fix? Well, it's a massive, carefully planned dredging operation. And when I say planned, I mean they've got some very specific numbers they're aiming for. Let's break it down. Get ready for this number. The plan is to pull out almost 500,000 cubic yards of sediment from those back bays. Just to give you a picture of what that looks like, that is enough gunk to fill about 150 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That is a ton of mud. And what are they aiming for? A consistent depth. They want to get those channels back to 5 feet below the average low tide. Why that specific number? Well, it makes sure boats have plenty of room to move, even when the tide is way out. So that average low tide thing, it's not just a guess. It's based on an official standard called mean low water. And this is pretty cool. It's a scientific baseline that's calculated over a whole 19-year period. This way, everyone's working from the exact same super reliable measurement. And if you want to know just how precise this has to be, check this out. The original permit had a typo. It said 4 feet instead of 5. So they had to issue an official correction, get this, on Christmas Eve of 2025, all to fix that 1 foot difference. That tells you right there is absolutely zero room for error. Okay, so you've dug up enough mud to fill 150 swimming pools. The next big question is, where do you put it all? You can't just dump it anywhere, right? Well, it turns out there's a whole process, a carefully managed journey for all that sediment. First, it gets dredged up. Then, it sits on barges to get a lot of the water out. Then, it's loaded into these special, sealed, watertight trucks before it's finally hauled off to its new home. So where is its new home? The permits are super clear about this. All that material is headed to 2 very specific, pre-approved spots in Atlantic County. One is a turf farm, and the other is a soil replenishment company. And this is where it gets really smart. This shows you a really modern way of thinking about this stuff. Instead of just treating it like waste, that dredged material is actually being recycled. It's classified for beneficial use, which basically means it's used as a soil additive to help grow things, like grass for a turf farm. Pretty cool, right? All right, so as you can probably guess, you can't just go digging up canals without a very strict set of rules. Let's take a look at the rule book, the conditions that are literally baked into these permits. I love this quote here from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's permit. It really gets right to the heart of it. The whole project is basically governed by one big idea. Get the job done, but be careful. Don't make a mess and don't harm the environment. And a huge piece of that do no harm principle is protecting the local residents. I'm talking about the fish and all the other marine life living in the bay. For instance, to protect migrating fish and even sandbar sharks, believe it or not, that use this area as a nursery, the permits set up blackout dates. This is serious stuff. For several months out of the year, during those really sensitive breeding and feeding times, all dredging work has to come to a complete stop. No exceptions. And it's not just about when they can work. There are also super specific rules for the equipment itself and how it's used every single day. I mean, these rules cover the whole shebang. The trucks, they've got to be completely watertight so they're not dripping muddy water all over the local roads. The pipelines they use, they have to be floated on the surface, not dragged along the bottom where they could cause damage. Even the intake on the dredge, the part that's literally sucking up the mud, has to be managed carefully to avoid sucking in fish and other marine life. So, you might be wondering, who is making up all these incredibly detailed rules? And who's making sure everyone follows them? Well, it's not just one agency.
Turns out a project like this needs permits from two totally different government bodies. At the state level, you've got the NJDEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, and at the federal level, you've got the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Each one has its own turf to protect, its own set of concerns, from state environmental laws all the way up to federal rules about keeping waterways open for boats. And that's really the key takeaway here. Something that seems so simple, right? Just dig the channel deeper. It's actually this incredibly complex balancing act. It's a huge collaboration, all wrapped up in a detailed legal and environmental framework that, frankly, most of us never even know is there.
So the next time you see a dredging barge out on the water, you'll know you're not just looking at a machine digging up mud. You're actually seeing the very last step in this long, complicated process of engineering, planning, and regulation. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible systems like this are working right now just below the surface?
For every creature, big and small, she stands to answer nature's call. We can be heroes side by side with Sherri's courage.